The Detroit Lions kick off week one of the NFL season against the Kansas City Chiefs. And if the Lions are looking to beat the reigning Super Bowl champs, there's players on both sides of the ball that they're going to need to keep an eye on, as well as have players on their own team that stand out. Let's talk about all that and more in today's video. What's going on, Lions fans? Miko here with Pride of Detroit, here to talk about week one of the NFL season with the Detroit Lions matching up against the reigning Super Bowl champs and the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, this is a day that all of us have been waiting for. Anticipation has been at its highest, and there's so much excitement built around this one game because it truly does feel like a measuring stick for the Lions as they get ready to kick off this 2023 season. And if the Lions are able to have a good showing against the Chiefs, it's only going to continue to add more fuel to the fire into what many already expect to be a very good season and one that should lead to the Lions possibly making a playoff push once the season kicks off. But if the Lions are going to be looking to get that win, if they're looking to really upset the Chiefs in week one and really put their stamp on the season, they're going to need to not only have players on their own team that really stand out, but there's a couple players on the Chiefs that they're actually going to have to keep an eye on and keep in check if they're hoping to, again, get that win from the first game of the season. So, with that said, in today's video, we're going to take a look at a couple impact players on both sides of the ball for both teams as players that need to either have a good game when we're talking about the Lions or players that they need to keep in check in regards to what the Chiefs are bringing to this game. So, without further ado, let's jump into the first players that need to have a really good game for the Detroit Lions. All right. So if we're going to talk about impact players, we got to start on the offensive side of the ball. And for me, that means starting with Jared Goff. Let's not make this complicated. For the Lions to actually have a good chance of winning this game, Jared Goff is going to need to be at his best. And I don't necessarily mean that he has to go out there and match Patrick Mahomes performance for performance, necessarily putting up 400 yards and a ton of touchdowns. But as far as just being the consistent quarterback that we saw throughout all of 2022, where he was very good with as far as keeping the ball away from the opposing team and just helping the team make consistent drives. That's the kind of play that we need from Jared Goff. The type of play that allowed him to be sixth in passing yards, tied for fifth in touchdowns, for having the fifth best QBR, and once again being top 10 in fewest turnovers in the NFL. That's the type of performance that you need from your quarterback. And if Jared Goff can be that, if he can basically help do what he's been doing since he's gotten here, which is, again, have command of the offense, get the ball to his playmakers, and allow them to basically do the heavy lifting, this team will be in a much better position offensively to be able to match what Kansas City is doing on their end, but at the same time, possibly control pace and allow the game to come to them so that they don't feel that they're pressed and that they have to do too much. Again, I know there's certain people that are going to look back at the fact that Jared Goff and Patrick Mahomes did have one of the most explosive and impressive football games in the history of the NFL where both teams were just lighting up the scoreboard. But I don't think that's necessarily the type of game that you want to get into with this type of roster. I don't think that's the type of game that Dan Campbell wants to play. And he's kind of talked about that when talking about Jared Goff in the past, basically when saying, like, listen, we don't expect Jared to do all the heavy lifting. We expect him to be a piece of the puzzle. And if that's what he's able to do in this game, be that piece of the puzzle and be a very important piece of that puzzle, then the Lions are going to be in a much better place to, again, have control of this game and play it to the way that they want to play it, whether that's play action, whether that's running the ball, whether that's just having a couple trick plays here or there, whatever they can do to allow Jared Goff to be comfortable and play at his most optimal performance. That's the thing that's going to lead this team to getting a much needed win in week one. Now, the next player that I'm going to highlight on the offensive side of the football that I think is just as important for this team to be able to find some type of success, again, specifically offensively, and giving themselves a chance to beat the Kansas City Chiefs in week one is probably going to catch a couple people off guard because normally I would probably be highlighting Amon-Ra St. Brown because let's face it, he's their most talented skill player. And don't get it twisted. Saint's going to have a very important role if this team is looking to win. he's going to have to continue to do what he's done throughout training camp and what he's done throughout his first 2 years in the league in order for this offense to be able to move at the pace and have the consistency that they've had. But for my money, a player that I'm highlighting and expecting to have a very big performance or that needs to have a big performance in order for this offense and this team to, be in the driver's seat is rookie Jahmyr Gibbs. And that's a lot of pressure. I get it to put on a rookie, even one that was drafted as high as 12th. But when you look at how this team has talked about Jahmyr Gibbs from jump in regards to using him as a weapon, being able to have him all over the field, not just in the backfield, but also playing wide receiver and doing a number of other things that even like Ben Johnson talked about the other day, doing things that people may not expect them to do with Jahmyr. That's why, for me, he's so important to this offense because I believe he's the wild card that the Kansas City Chiefs are not quite sure how to plan for just yet because he can be used in so many different ways. And the fact that, again, he's going to be, rotated in and out with David Montgomery. And when you have that type of 1-2 punch, you're constantly going to be having to adjust your defense with the personnel and trying to figure out who's in the game, where they lined up, and exactly how that player may be utilized in that specific series. Because let's not get it twisted again. Jahmyr could definitely be getting the ball on a number of these situations, but there's also situations where he could be a decoy and allow for open opportunities for guys like Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Josh Reynolds, and the list goes on and on and on. That's why, for me, Jahmyr is such an important piece. And again, we don't know how it's going to translate. What he did in college was very impressive. And sure, there's going to be bumps along the road. But I think if the Lions can give him a good set of plays and something that he can definitely, find a rhythm in while working through this offense, that's going to be the thing that'll keep the Kansas City Chiefs defense a little bit on their heels. They have really good linebackers over there. And trust me, it's something that the Lions are going to have to be focused on. It's something that Dan Campbell has already talked about them being focused on. But I still think a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs is somebody that you would take in a one-on-one situation in the event that you're able to get him lined up with any of the linebackers that the Kansas City Chiefs have. So as important as it is for the offense to find a rhythm and be able to keep pace with the Kansas City Chiefs offense, when you start looking at this game, it's also very important that the defense helps dictate that pace as far as being able to keep the Kansas City Chiefs offense in check and being able to limit the amount of points that they're putting up. And when we start talking about the defensive pieces that are really need to shine and really need to stand out, I think it's the guys that we should, for the most part, expect. And I'm going to start first and foremost with Aidan Hutchinson. Hutch is coming off one of the more impressive rookie seasons that we've seen by a Detroit Lions defender. And going into this year, he's going to need to be able to take that same level of performance and take it up a notch. After notching 9.5 sacks, having some impressive tackle for loss numbers, having a really good, strong showing as far as being able to create turnovers, even though I don't necessarily expect him to get 3 interceptions again, Hutch at least showed that versatility that he can do more than just rush the passer. He is still very stout against the run. He can be dropped into coverage in various situations, and he knows how to read situations. And when going up against the likes of Patrick Mahomes in this offense, he's going to need all of those tool sets. He's going to be able to have to show that he can absolutely get to the passer on passing down situations or even on situations where maybe it's not necessarily a third down situation, but still being able to rattle Patrick Mahomes in the pocket. And at the same time, he's also going to have to still be able to show that he can be stout in the run game because the Kansas City Chiefs are still going to try to operate within the run, no matter how explosive and how dynamic the likes of Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce are. Being able to contain the run game and then give yourself opportunities to rush the passer is going to be something that will set up Hutch in an amazing opportunity to be able to do what he does best, which is, again, cause havoc in the backfield. And even if it's not him, same way we talked about with Jahmyr Gibbs possibly being a decoy, Hutch is going to get a lot of attention. Again, leading sack leader last season, he was double teamed quite often last year. I expect that to be somewhat of the same this year. But the benefit of having a guy like that on your defense and other players along your defensive line and having the depth that the Lions have retained after their, roster cuts is that those other guys, your Charles Harris's, your John Kaminsky's, your Josh Pascal's, Romeo Aquara, and the likes, those guys get more one-on-one opportunities and they get opportunities to get after the quarterback and pick up wherever Hutch may be not necessarily being able to make plays of his own. He can still be that setup man for the rest of the defense. And that's why, for me, Whether it's him making plays of his own or him just showing that relentless motor to continuously put pressure on the offense, that's what this defense is going to need so that everyone can be able to have a part and play a role in being able to contain this offense. Those guys will be able to play off of his energy and then be able to translate that hopefully into success on the defensive side of the football. And speaking of energy and being able to feed off of one individual, that's going to lead me into the next player that the Lions are really going to need to stand out and be an impact player for them. And that should be no surprise to anybody. I'm talking about CJ Gardner-Johnson. CJ's presence on this team is very crucial in my opinion. And I think it matters more so in this game, probably in any other game. And it's because I think the matchup between CJ and Travis Kelce is going to be one to watch. I do think obviously that they are going to have Brian Branch line up against Kelce a few times, but he's still a rookie. And I think to be able to give the rookie some breaks and not allow him to be too overwhelmed, I would still expect CJ to get a number of opportunities against Travis Kelce so that they can at least give him different looks as far as who he's lining up against and who's going to give him different fits. But again, going back to the energy aspect of it, CJ has been doing that since day one, since he's gotten into Detroit. And I expect that level of energy to be the same type of infectiousness that it's been to help this team get even more excited, to help this defense be even more locked in because there's a consistent message, there's a consistent tone, there's a consistent, philosophy that is going to be coming from one player on the field and not just from the coaching staff. Clearly, Dan Campbell, Aaron Glenn, they've been preaching the same thing since they've gotten in Detroit. But now to have a player in CJ Gardner Johnson that gets it, who understands what these coaches are talking about and understands what it's like to get to the highest level as far as playing in a Super Bowl, that level of experience, that level of energy, that level of understanding the importance of doing the little things could be one of the biggest differences in this game to be able to help not just the secondary be on the same page, but the entire defense. Aleem McNeil talked about it in the offseason about how having those guys back there so amped up, so energetic, even was trickling down to him as a defensive tackle. So CJ being the person that he's been throughout the offseason, I fully expect his level of energy to help this defense be locked in and be ready to go up against the Kansas City Chiefs and give them a really tough run for their money. So, guys, that's going to do it for what the Lions need to do on their side of the ball to be able to keep themselves in contention with the Kansas City Chiefs come this Thursday. But there's players on the Chiefs side that the Lions also have to be very mindful of if they want to give themselves an opportunity to, again, be in this game and get a win at the end of it. And that begins and ends with the likes of Patrick Mahomes. We all know how impressive and special Patrick Mahomes is as a football player. And the Lions are absolutely going to have their hands full. This is a guy who is a reigning MVP, who led the league in touchdowns, passing yards per game, and was top five in so many other categories. He's that guy. But this defense is going to have to do their very best to limit his impact and limit what he can do to them and put his team in position to score, in position to win. And that begins with, honestly, for the most part, getting to him often and early with the likes of having a very versatile defensive line with Aidan Hutchinson, Charles Harris, John Kaminsky, Aleem McNeil, and the list goes on and on and on. The Lions have to do more than just keep him in the pocket, but they have to be able to suffocate him in the pocket and keep him from extending plays out. This is something that Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn both kind of talked about this week, is that that's where Patrick Mahomes becomes very stressful and difficult for your defense, is that when he takes plays where, your corner should only be covering for 2 seconds and now they have to cover for 4 to 6 seconds, that's going to be problematic. But if the Lions can, again, keep him in the pocket, suffocate the pocket, and force him to make decisions quickly before he necessarily wants to, that will at least give them more opportunities to be able to make plays on the ball or at least get him out of a rhythm so that he can't just sit back in the pocket and dice them up for 4 quarters. Now, if Patrick Mahomes is problem number one for the Lions, Travis Kelce would essentially be problem 1B because that's just how dynamic he's continued to be throughout his NFL career so far. Travis Kelce is a handful. And this is why, as much as it's going to be important to be able to confine and limit what Patrick Mahomes does, it becomes also just as important to be able to know where Travis Kelce is on the field and limit his number of opportunities so that he doesn't carve up your defense because of the fact that he lines up as a tight end. He, in most situations, is going to have the advantage with most players that he lines up against. I mean, this is a guy that's 6'5", over 260, and he is a monster of a man that also moves incredibly well as a receiver. This is a guy who was 3rd in receptions, not just for tight ends, but for all receivers. This was a guy that was 8th in receiving yards. Again, not for tight ends, for all receivers. 2nd in touchdowns for all receivers. That's how dynamic and impressive Travis Kelce is. And with the ability to be able to line up both in line, flexed out wide, in the slot, wherever the Chiefs really need him, he can be a handful. The thing that gives me confidence, though, is what I talked about as far as highlighting my impact players. You do have the likes of a CJ Gardner-Johnson. You do have a Brian Branch. You do have a Tracy Walker. I mean, if you decide to employ him throughout the game at some point, just to be able to give yourself more bodies that you can throw at Travis Kelce to be able to limit his impact. But the true test and the true ability to limit what Travis Kelce does is going to go back to what I said in the first point, which is limiting Patrick Mahomes, because that's going to be the number one target. The Chiefs don't have a ton of, dynamic wide receivers like they used to when they had Tyreek Hill, and at least they had, Hill and Kelsey that could hurt you. For the most part, it's Travis Kelce, and if it's not Travis Kelce, you just need your corners on the outside and your linebackers to be mindful of the other players on the field, because, yes, Patrick Mahomes can make anybody look good at any given moment, but Travis Kelce is the one that you can't allow to hurt you for 4 quarters, because even when you think you have him contained, he can easily blow up on you and have 2 to 3 touchdowns before you blink an eye. That's just how good he is. Now, let's move on to the defensive side of the football. And I know there's a lot of Lion fans that are feeling really good about the Lions being able to find success on the offensive side because the Chiefs won't have Chris Jones, at least that's what it looks like, for this Thursday night game. But just because Chris Jones is the guy on their defense doesn't mean that there aren't other impactful players on this defense to be mindful of that could, again, make life difficult for Jared Goff and the other players on this offense. It's important to keep in mind that this Chiefs defense was much better than they've been in the past few years, where they were sometimes at the bottom, but really being carried by a very powerful offense. Last year, the Chiefs defense was right there in the middle. And yes, Chris Jones has a lot to do with that. But even still, when you start to look at their linebacking core, which is something that Dan Campbell highlighted, you start to find guys in that unit that definitely do some good heavy lifting in both the run and the pass game. And when looking specifically at one guy in particular that the Lions should have their eyes on, for me, it's Nick Bolton. Going into his 3rd year in the NFL, Nick Bolton has definitely seen his game improve from his rookie year to his sophomore year. And I think going into this 3rd year, he's probably looking for even more success. He was one of the better linebackers in the NFL, finishing 2nd in total tackles in the NFL and also being 2nd in solo tackles. So he is the type of guy who, when the ball is in play, he's going to find it. And if you're looking for someone to be making a tackle, it's probably going to be Bolton. He's also an amazing run defender. PFF credited him with 55 run stops throughout the 22 season. And with a team like the Lions, who likes to get their passing game going by first getting their run game started, that's an important thing to have of note, is just the fact of understanding where number 32 is on the field and being sure that your guards or your receivers or your tight ends are getting a body on him and getting him out the way. Because if you don't, he will make plays and he will make life hard for you in the run game. And like I said, Nick Bolton is maybe not somebody that a lot of us probably focus on as far as one of the more well-known linebackers in the NFL. But when you look at PFF specifically and they look at how they graded out the linebackers from 2022, Nick Bolton was just outside the top 10 at number 12. He's a guy who is still young, who is still growing his game. And if the Lions are not going to take account of him, he could give them a lot of problems. Now, the thing that gives me at least a little bit of hope in the Lions being able to scheme and take advantage of Nick Bolton is 2 things particularly. One, he's not the most physically imposing linebacker. He's only 5'11", which, shocker, is the same size as Jahmyr Gibbs. So when we're talking about being able to at least physically take advantage of him, that's where your offensive line and some of your tight ends should be able to find success in being able to move him in the run game, but also in the pass game, where that height is going to probably be a detractor for him when lining up against the likes of a Sam Laporta or a Brock Wright or even James Mitchell if you decide to throw him out there. he just doesn't have the big imposing size that you normally would expect from linebackers. And when you look at his PFF grades, while he did grade just outside the top 10 for his total grade, when you look at him in coverage, that is not where Nick Bolton excels. And so I would kind of expect the Lions to try to take advantage of him in those situations and find matchups, whether it's against bigger tight ends or against speedy running backs, to be able to exploit what he has and what he's able to bring in the passing game. Looking beyond Nick Bolton, the Lions do have some other players on this defense that are worth contending with, even though Chris Jones won't be available. Who, again, Chris Jones did everything for this defense pretty much last year as far as tackles, sacks, tackles for loss. He was a force for their defensive line. But the Lions do have some other players on that defensive line that they have to be mindful of. And for me, that starts with George Karlaftis, the 30th pick in last year's draft. And while a lot of us were very hyped up on Aidan Hutchinson, rightfully so, because obviously he was our player, and a lot of us were also hyping up James Houston, again, Detroit Lions player, George Karlaftis was also going through the NFL racking up sacks as well. He finished third in sacks behind both Houston and Hutchinson with 6 sacks of his own, and was somebody that at one point in time during that draft process was seen to go as high as the teens based off of what he was able to do in his just imposing side and his freakish athleticism. And now going into this sophomore year, much like Hutch, Karlaftis is going to be looking to stack and improve on all the things that he brought to this Kansas City Chiefs defense last year. Now, outside of his 6 sacks, Karlaftis still was able to put up the third most tackles for loss amongst rookies and was able to put up 22 quarterback pressures. So again, this was a guy who played a lot of games for the Chiefs last year and found ways of getting to the quarterback. Going into this game, Karlaftis is going to have to line up against both Sewell and Taylor Decker. And depending on how those matchups go, could really dictate how the Lions offense finds success. Again, if you have a guy in Nick Bolton that's giving you trouble in the run game, and then a guy like Karlaftis that is causing you trouble in the passing game, this game could really get out of hand for the Lions. Fortunately, you do have 2 really good tackles in both Decker and Sewell. And both of those guys are somebody that I have a utmost confidence in being able to contain or at least limit the impact of George Karlaftis. Not to mention, while Karlaftis was able to pick up 6 sacks last year, it immediately brings you back to the Chris Jones effect of how successful can this defense be without him on the field. Because again, while PFF isn't the end all be all, you start to kind of look at the PFF grades for some of these defensive linemen and some of these edge rushers. And outside of Chris Jones, it's not very impressive. And so, with one of the better offensive lines in the NFL, you should at least feel very confident that the Lions can at least control the line of scrimmage and limit the amount of pressure that they are able to put on both Jared Goff and the amount of impact that they can have on the Lions run game. So guys, that's going to do it for today's video. That's the players that I have standing out on both the Lions and the Chiefs side. And if the Lions are able to keep the Chiefs in check and as well as get their own players to rise to the occasion, I really do think that they can have a very strong chance of beating the Chiefs week 1. But let me know in the comment section, are there some players that you specifically have circled as like, hey, these are players that the Lions need to step up, as well as, hey, this is a player on the Chiefs that I'm kind of worried about? Let me know in the comment section below. Also, if you're looking for more coverage on the Lions, be sure to head over to prideofdetroit.com. We're always uploading new articles and new things about the Lions over on our website. And last but not least, if you're new to the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell. That way you can be notified anytime we upload any new videos to this channel. Again, everyone, I'm Miko here with Pride of Detroit. Thank you for taking the time to watch, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.